All right, guys. This is Mr. Count, and this is for periods 7 and 9 on Friday, Friday, February 12th, I should say. I do apologize. I'll fix that tomorrow at some point, I'm sure. Um, I am not there, so what I wanted to do was leave you guys this video to go over some pretty important notes that you needed before you complete a second ed puzzle on Marbury versus Madison dealing with judicial review. But before we get there, we need to talk about the election of 1800 and the impact that it would wind up having on the country at the time. All right. First, you don't need to write down this page of notes, but the other pages you should get down as you go along. All right. The Constitution and Electoral College kind of comes into play. And, we saw a lot going on with the Electoral College back in January of this year. And it is something that as we've discussed, was controversial from the moment it was put into the Constitution and has gone through changes over time. And part of that was due to one of its earliest challenges in 1800. You figure this would have been the fourth presidential election to have ever taken place, and it wound up into a tie. All right. The rules around the Electoral College are laid out in Article 2. Article 2 deals with the executive branch, and it notes that the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States. All right. And goes on to talk about the powers that they may have. The 12th Amendment, which was added after this controversy, all right, determined that the greatest number of votes for president shall be the president, if such a number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. States appoint electors, all right? And if no person having such majority, then from the persons having the highest number not exceeding 3 on the list of those voted for as president, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president. Now, the reason why I want to note this is because what it lays out is that there is the extremely remote possibility that the House of Representatives could determine who the president is in the event that there were to be a tie. All right. Now, the election of 1800. These notes I would like you to get down and take down as we go along. All right. In 1800, each elector would get to cast 2 votes. The electors for each state, as a quick reminder, are determined by the number of representatives your state gets in Congress. So if your state has 13 members in the House of Representatives plus 2 senators, you would get 15 electoral votes. Now in 1800, each of those electors would actually get 2 votes for a total of 30 potential electors in that state. Now, the problem was back then in 1800, Thomas Adams had ran as a Federalist, but Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr decided to run together because their thought is that one of them would wind up becoming president, right? The problem with this, right, is that they wound up tied with the most number of electoral votes. They were both Democratic Republicans, both running together, and the electors basically said, well, I have 2 votes. I'll put one for Jefferson and one for Burr. Well, then they wound up in a tie. It was kind of a bit of a silly, stupid little thing that kind of happened. All right. Now, Adams had lost after one term, and he actually left town before the eventual winner would be sworn in. All right. We'll get back to that in a moment. It was upon the outgoing, at the time, it was up to the outgoing House of Representatives to vote on who would become president. So they had to choose between Jefferson and Burr. They took 36 votes to decide the outcome. And the thing that actually eventually wound up tipping the scales was a letter that Alexander Hamilton had written throwing his support behind his old rival Jefferson. We've talked throughout this unit about the bitter rivalry between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. But Hamilton is actually who helped make Thomas Jefferson to become president because he believed that Aaron Burr was untrustworthy. He had interactions with Burr throughout history, dating all the way back to the Revolution, but he was pretty unimpressed with Aaron Burr, as were a lot of people actually, and felt that Jefferson would do a better job because he was more trustworthy and actually spoke about what he had believed in. And needless to say, Aaron Burr was not pleased about this. The final outcome that you would get is that Jefferson would win the presidency on the 37th ballot. It took a good week for them to be able to sort it out, even a little bit longer. And Burr would be made vice president. But as we've discussed before, the role of vice president doesn't really have much authority and doesn't give them much to do. And as a matter of fact, at the time, even though Burr was the vice president of the United States and D.C. was a brand new city, Burr spent most of his time in New York. You might think, well, D.C. to New York, it's not that far. But in 1800, it'd take you a couple of days by horse and carriage to get there. All right. Eventually, what wound up happening through a variety of kind of rivalries and things that they were disputing, Burr would challenge Hamilton to a duel, and Burr would kill Hamilton in that duel in Weehawken, New Jersey. If you're ever going up to New York City and you take the Lincoln Tunnel, where the tunnel enters into, that is Weehawken, New Jersey. And on the bluffs overlooking the Hudson River, Burr shot and killed Hamilton. Burr would resign the vice presidency and actually left and fled to Great Britain for a while afterwards, all right? And wound up kind of dying in obscurity, did Burr. This little video, which I will put onto Google Classroom for you, it's just kind of a funny commercial from the early 90s about a guy who knows about it but loses a contest to win $10,000. But it was a big funny commercial at the time. All right. Last note for you guys. Judicial strength, because this is one of the keys that we need to focus in on. Before Adams left, before he was out of office, during kind of this lame duck period that exists between an election and inauguration, Adams decided that he was going to strengthen the federal court system by adding 16 new judges under the Judiciary Act of 1801. If you remember, we had talked about an earlier Judiciary Act of 1791 that created how many members would be on the Supreme Court and had created the federal court system. Well, now this Judiciary Act would add even more judges, and Adams saw this as a possibility for the Federalist Party to assert control. Federal judges are appointed for the rest of their lives, and presidents have the opportunity to basically get people that agree with them ideologically onto the court for a really long time. If there are a lot of openings, that is one of their main goals. One of the things that, to give you a perfect example, Trump had appointed something like 100 plus federal judges, and the vast majority of them under the age of 50. And along with Republicans in the Senate, because all federal judges are appointed by the Senate, has basically established a legacy of conservative judges for decades to come. And, even though he may have only served one term, his impact will be felt for decades to come because of those judges. All right. So what Adams did is he appointed Federalist judges. He was a Federalist to these positions and felt that they would basically help institute the ideals he believed in long after he left. Now, these judges were called midnight judges because they basically appointed him at the last minute on his way out the door. And since they were appointed and proved by Federalists in the Senate, there was nothing that Thomas Jefferson could do about these judges. However, he did attempt to do something about at least one of the judges, and this is who you're going to be learning about. One of these appointments would be controversial, John Marbury, and it would lead to a Supreme Court decision that gives the Supreme Court its strength that it still exerts to this day. It is perhaps the most important decision the Supreme Court ever made, and it was 200 plus years ago, 220 years ago, all right? But it gives the Supreme Court the strength that it has to this day. So what you're going to do is there's an Edpuzzle on Marbury versus Madison, which was the Supreme Court decision that gave them their strength. It is one of the Crash Course videos, but it does a pretty good job of going through the details of the case and helps you to understand what this strength is and why it is so important. All right. So when you're done this video, you will have to watch that video I know a lot of videos. I do apologize. I hope you guys have a nice long 3-day weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday.